and I will be your host for today's session. A special welcome to those of you that are joining us for the first time this morning, and to our participants from the Community College of Baltimore County and Maryland AHACs, thanks again for joining us this week. Today you will be hearing from Dr. Christopher DiDamo. But before I introduce Dr. DiDamo, I'll quickly go over a few instructions for the Q&A session. Dr. DiDamo, will be answering your questions at the end of this presentation. If you're not using your video camera, you have the option of inserting your questions in the chat box while the presentation is in session. Or if you prefer to answer your questions audibly, please raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. If you've called in this morning from your phone, you can raise your hand by dialing *9. From your computer, click Participants on the Zoom menu bar, and a white Participants box should appear. From there, click the Raise Hand command at the bottom. If you're using your Zoom app on your tablet or phone, click Participants, choose More, and then choose Raise Hand. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Christopher DiDamo. Dr. DiDamo is an epidemiologist with expertise in the synergistic effects of healthy lifestyle practices on human health and wellness. He received his PhD in epidemiology from the University of Maryland School of Medicine and is currently an assistant professor with dual appointments in the Center for Integrative Medicine within the Department of Family and Community Medicine, as well as the Department of Epidemiology and Public Health. Dr. DiDamo also serves as the Director of Research at the Center for Integrative Medicine and holds adjunct faculty positions in the Gerontology Doctoral Program of the University of Maryland and the Maryland University of Integrative Health. Dr. DiDamo's expertise in nutrition research has cut across the entire lifespan from children to older adults and has extended from the bench to the bedside and beyond into community settings. Here to present micronutrients and markers of healthy aging, Dr. DiDamo.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And I'm going to pull up my screen here. Give me one sec. All right, and off we go. So I'm actually, the title of the talk, was micronutrients, but I'm actually going to get into the whole spectrum. I mean, I feel like when we talk about nutrition for healthy aging and, optimal function, which is a passion of mine for a variety of reasons that I'll get into, I really think we need to look at the whole picture. So we're going to talk about macronutrients as well. We're going to talk about some other factors, hydration even, but micronutrients will be a core focus. But we're going to look at the sort of whole shebang here because that's what we really need to think about when it comes to optimal aging. So this is a picture of me from a few years ago with my grandfather. This is one of the inspirations I had. So he lived to be nearly 101 years old and was playing golf and tennis and lifting weights until his upper 90s, about 98 or 99 actually. And, he was a hard-charging executive in New York and didn't live particularly healthy for the first half of his life, really. Smoked cigarettes and didn't sleep very much and then really discovered nutrition. And the way he did that was sort of funny because he was in some kind of gathering and somebody, his name is Bing, and someone said, Bing, he's the portly guy. He looked at himself and said, am I portly? And he goes, God, I guess I kind of am. And he had been a pro athlete in a previous career. So from that day forward, he changed his nutrition around and just was a model of great health, up until the very end of his life. And it's one of the reasons that I got into the study of this because I thought, wow, humans have so much potential. And we don't necessarily need to have the trajectory that our function declines when we get to a certain age. A lot of it has to do with our lifestyle. So I'm also a personal exercise trainer. I don't do much of that anymore. There's only so many hours in the day, but there's a lot having to do with lifestyle that can help us thrive and function optimally very deep into our lives. And this is a personal passion too, a lot of this stuff. And we're at plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to give sort of the big picture on this subject, and then we can get into a lot of the minutiae if you want, or some of the cutting edge types of things. But I thought I would make it accessible pretty much for anybody at any entry point on this subject. So basically, we'll start out and just give for those that don't have much of a nutrition background, we'll talk a little bit about nutrition, sort of a one-on-one type of thing. Get into some of the assessment methods. I mean, how do we measure these things? It's not really a research question. This is actually relevant to, your sort of clinical care too, things you can ask for and so on. Then we'll look at some of the unique needs of older adults and get into some of the malnutrition types of things, but making sure to leave questions for anything else. So if we start out, this is kind of nutrition on a slide. When we talk about nutrition, really we're talking about foods, and we'll get into that. But when we look at nutrients themselves, there are two main categories. There are macronutrients and micronutrients. All right. So the macronutrients provide energy for the body. And these energy is most often measured in calories, all right? So we have three macronutrients. You see them listed here: protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And a lot of the dietary advice of the popular diet books and so on are macronutrient focused. We had low-fat diets. They've largely gone out of favor. We can talk about that if you like. Low carbohydrate diets are pretty popular. High protein diets. So there's a lot of the dietary on macronutrients, but that's certainly not where the story ends. Then we have thousands of micronutrients. So these are things like vitamins and minerals, and we'll look at exactly what those are. I know we've all heard of those, but we'll look at exactly what they are. Then you have all these non-essential micronutrients, and this is pretty fascinating stuff. This is where a lot of the cutting edge research when it comes to nutrition and health and particularly nutrition and aging is occurring. And we'll talk about a lot of those. All right. So those are the two main groups of nutrients. So if you look at the macronutrients, we'll start with protein. This is especially important for aging because our protein needs go up as we age. And you see some of the sources here. There are two main types. There are complete proteins and incomplete proteins. So complete proteins just mean that the source contains all 9 of the essential amino acids. These are amino acids that our body can't produce. So we need to get them from our diets or supplementation. And most animal proteins are complete. Okay, so they contain these 9 essential amino acids. Then you have incomplete proteins. And all that means is it doesn't contain at least one of the 9 essential amino acids. And most plant proteins are incomplete, but these can be combined to become complete. So if you look at something like, a lot of times I like to go back to what did traditional cultures do? Because a lot of times they figured it out over the courses of like thousands of years. But rice and beans, for example, one is missing the essential amino acid lysine, the other, the essential amino acid arginine. You combine these together and you've got a complete protein. So that can be done. But it is something we need to be aware of for people on vegan or plant-based diets that, that a lot of those sources are not complete, all right, in and of themselves. So these are broken down to amino acids by protease enzymes, and they contain 4 calories per gram. So that's protein. Move on to carbohydrate. Lots of different sources of this, lots of different types. Now, there are no technically essential carbohydrates. And for most people, you feel better having them. But you may have heard about ketogenic diets, which are very low carbohydrate. Our center has done some work on ketogenic diets for prostate cancer. I don't know that, frankly, I don't think they're a great idea for most people to do for the long term, but they are out there, and I can answer questions about that if you're interested. Back to carbohydrates, there are several different types. Here, simple or complex. And pardon the pun, but it's not so simple. That simple is bad and complex is good. We really got to think of the food sources of this. And then you've got fiber. Now, fiber is very different than the other types of carbohydrates which raise blood sugar. Fiber does not. All right. And fiber is something that feeds our gut bacteria. We hear more and more about probiotics, the relationship between the gut bacteria and human health overall. And fiber is what feeds that. We can talk about different kinds of fiber as we go along as well. So with the exception of fiber, which is non-caloric, carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Last but not least is fat. So there are 2 essential fatty acids. For those that are into nutrition, you may hear about omega-3 and omega-6 fats. Again, nutrition is very rarely so simple that, things are all good or bad. A lot of times we hear omega-6 is bad, we need more omega-3. Well, most people, they do because they eat too much omega-6, but we actually need some omega-3 and omega-6 in our diet. And fat, you know, at one point in time was thought to be detrimental to health, despite knowing we have essential fatty acids. But we now realize we need to paint with a finer brush and not so broadly say all fat's bad, 'cause it's not. Interestingly, even further, and I can answer questions about this too, saturated fat itself is not all bad. Some are neutral, and some may even be positive. So things like trans fats, those are no good. But a lot of the others, you know, really kind of depends on the source of the food that contains the fat. Now, fat is more calorically dense. You see 9 calories per gram. This is one of the reasons that low-fat diets were popular, because of calories. But we've since come to realize that there are you know, better approaches for most people. Okay, so those are the macronutrients. We'll now move on to the micronutrients. Again, this will be a little more focused today. I will start with vitamins. You know, we all know what these are. They're listed there. Again, when I say no endogenous production, it just means that we don't make any of our own. We have to obtain it through the diet. Now, interestingly, humans are one of the few mammals that don't produce their own vitamin C. We don't. We need to get it through the diet. And that's maybe especially important now in COVID-19 times. There's a fair amount of vitamin C studies that are going on right now. In any case, so immune system, you know, I think classically you think, you get a cold, feel cold coming on, drink more orange juice or something like that. But it's so much more than that. So for making collagen, so for anyone who has arthritis or, you know, sort of skin health, and collagen is a part of hair, skin, joints, and so on. Vitamin C is essential for making collagen. It's also essential for making neurotransmitters, for metabolism of cholesterol. So a lot of times these vitamins get pigeonholed to say, well, vitamin C for the immune system, but really they do so many other things. So, you know, I know we got a lot of people on the call. A lot of times I'll you know, ask what are some examples. Obviously, orange. There's a lot of other foods that contain vitamin C. So interestingly, red bell peppers, yellow bell peppers probably have the most per calorie. But all of these sources here are good. So lots of fruits and vegetables, including citrus, contain vitamin C. There may be needs sometimes to take more, desires to take more in supplement form, but these are amply obtained through the diet as well. Okay, so minerals. A lot of times you hear this, vitamins and minerals said together, very similar. You know, these don't contain carbon, but we need them for health. Same deal. We don't produce them on our own. We have to get them through the diet. There are macro and trace. And by the way, it's a lot of information here, but you'll have access to the slides. I can certainly provide them too if you like. So macros, you probably guess, you just need more. So things like calcium, magnesium, we're going to talk a lot about today because this is very commonly deficient in people. Trace minerals, we just need less, but they're equally important. So calcium, that's a big one. You know, we think about this a lot. And we often think of milk, but a fair amount of people have lactose issues. So the good news is you can get calcium from fermented dairies, things like yogurt or kefir, you know, where the lactose is consumed by those probiotic bacteria. But for those that avoid dairy altogether, there are some other sources, things like sesame seeds or tahini. I love sardines, so much so that they actually call me Dr. Sardine at Mom's Market, where I go a few times a week because I get so many sardines. Leafy greens as well. But if you're osteoporotic or osteopenic, you really want to take a calcium supplement with vitamin D. That part is important. You know, you need the vitamin D to get the calcium to get into your bones where you want it and out of the circulation where you don't want it. All right, but these are some other sources. Now we get into, this is sort of the cutting edge, these non-vitamin, non-mineral micronutrients. They're really fascinating. So they're not technically essential, but they have lots of health benefits. So things like carotenoids. I've done published some papers on this, looking at genetic predictors. How I can eat a tomato and you can eat a tomato. We can have different levels of lycopene. So lycopene is in tomatoes. It's in watermelon. So we used to think of watermelon as like nature's candy, but it actually is pretty nutritive and very cooling during the winter, although it's been cool enough outside recently. But in any case, these offer a lot of color to fruits and vegetables. So lutein and zeaxanthin are in leafy greens. These are really important. If you have macular degeneration or are worried about it, they've been shown in clinical studies to reduce the risk and progression of age-related macular degeneration. I mentioned lycopene. Alpha and beta carotene are another one. So these are orange. All right. So obviously in carrots, but in other things too, pumpkin and so on, squash. All right. So these are carotenoids, not vitamins and minerals, but really beneficial for health. Okay. There we go. So then flavonoids. This is a red hot area. So if we get any real nutrition junkies on the call, we can talk about resveratrol. So resveratrol is one that's been shown to help upregulate what are called these sirtuin genes that help potentially slow the aging process, or certainly reduce the incidence of age-related disease. There's some other supplements that can go along with that. So it's in red wine. Most people like that news. There's curcumin, which is in turmeric, the orange spice, EGCG in green tea, anthocyanidins in berries. So all of these things, they have a lot of different roles. They reduce inflammation, which is important for aging. They all have all kinds of signaling to turn genes on and off. They feed our gut bacteria. So really fascinating stuff. And you know what, something very interesting about this is that a lot of these components are actually toxins. So they're the ways that the plants defend themselves, but they're toxins in very small amounts. And you may have heard, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's sort of what goes on with these. They build up our body's defense systems, which is sort of why you don't want to overdo it with some of these as well. Now, some people may need to take more. If you've got pain, you may need to take a curcumin supplement, can help with that. Or resveratrol, if someone's interested in some of the age-related diseases that it's been associated with. So interesting stuff there. Everything above this bottom line has been plant foods. Animal foods also are good sources of things. So choline in egg yolks. So this is one of the things I think that's frustrating for a lot of people. Like one week you hear eggs are good and the next you hear they're bad. A lot of this emanates from nutritional epidemiology, of which I am one. I'm a nutritional epidemiologist by training, but these kinds of studies can be misleading. When they look at big populations of people, those who eat eggs, and what kind of health status do they have. And there's a lot of things we call confounders in this that can influence, was it really the eggs that were associated with good or bad health, or was it other habits that people had? Like red meat in the middle there too. That's a good source of L-carnitine, very important for mitochondrial function. The mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of the cell, which a lot of times with age decrease their function. So, when we look at something, the red meat, is it the red meat that the people ate in these big population-based studies, or is it the fries and soda that came along with it? So nutritional epidemiology can be it has been in many cases misleading. Then coenzyme Q10, there's my beloved sardines on the far right of the screen. Coenzyme Q10 is depleted. If anyone takes a statin, you really should consider taking coenzyme Q10 as a supplement. It's not in many foods, unfortunately, or at least many foods that people find palatable. It's in like animal heart. Okay, not many people like that very much. But coenzyme Q10, is depleted by statins and very important for muscle function, including heart function in particular. Right. So these are some of the real interesting players in micronutrients as it pertains to health and aging. I'm going to go through this material quickly. Again, you'll have the slides. Basically, this is sort of the alphabet soup of different things. And really what I want to mention is the RDA is what you see on your food labels. What's very important to know, this is the averages you see listed there to meet nutrient requirements of most people. What most people don't realize is that these vary by gender and life stage, including age. So a lot of times in older age, we need more of these nutrients, vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, and so on. Vitamin B12, another very important one we'll talk about. But these are to prevent nutrient deficiency diseases, not chronic disease. All right, so this is the amount of vitamin C you need to prevent scurvy. All right, most people are looking to do more at their health and just not have scurvy. All right, so this is an area where we need, what are the optimal levels to reduce chronic disease? We need more research in there. We've got pretty good idea for vitamin D, but we need it for all the other ones as well. I'm not going to get too much into this other than to say that these are really, they're good for public health perspective, to prevent, rickets or pellagra, or scurvy and so on. But we really need to think about, looking at this about more than just preventing the absence of a nutrient deficiency. I'll get more into that as we go along. Okay, so this does show you, it's small, but notice how there are some differences in things with age. So if kids need less a lot of times, obviously they're smaller, it sort of makes sense. You know, other stages of life, pregnancy and lactation and so on, right? So these are just the ones to prevent the deficiency disease. Okay, nutrition is not one size fit all. I really want to emphasize that. The needs vary between people based on things like gender, weight, activity levels, smoking, and by stage of life. And this is age, stress, you know, during disease status or during disease and so on and so forth. So, and this is especially important, you know, to older adults who have, you know, comorbidities. You know, there's other things. I mean, for example, you know, vitamin C I find very interesting. If you take too much vitamin C, you'll get beyond what we call bowel tolerance and you get diarrhea. Now, when people have a cold, that level goes way up. And normally if you have like 10 grams of vitamin C, it's a lot. You know, you might get loose stool. But for people that have a cold, they've shown it's like factors of magnitude higher, like 50 grams before people get diarrhea. I did my doctoral work on vitamin E and hip fracture, and vitamin E levels after hip fracture are depleted almost completely. So, you know, may need more. So and those are just two examples, right? So we really need to be aware of that. Okay. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the nutritional assessment methods. So basically, how do we come up with these things? How do we even come up with this? Or, you know, how do we, in the research? So there's 24-hour dietary recall. This is the most widely used. So basically, they ask somebody, what did you eat in the last 24 hours? And this, think to yourself, you know, do you even remember that? You know, I think a lot of people don't. It seems easier, you know, than it may actually be. And a lot of times you know, there's a lot of problems with this. People eat different things. I mean, everyone doesn't eat the same thing every day. So a lot of times you need to have multiple recalls to obtain usual intake. Then there are these food frequency questionnaires. It's a large questionnaire with a lot of different foods on it that will say over the last 2 weeks or month or a year, you know, what of these things did you eat? Then there's food diaries. You know, you may have done that just on your own for your own health purposes. When I was doing more personal training, I would look at this for people, and we've done this in some of our studies. Then there's one, it's an older adult sort of specific called the mini nutritional assessment, an MNA. This is used for a couple things. One is to screen for malnutrition. All right, that's brief. Then it's a little bit more of an in-depth assessment after that. And this is it. Okay, we don't need to go through this too much, but what you'll see is things like weight loss or mobility. You see the screening there. You know, psychological stress or disease, low BMI. These are all risks for malnutrition. Then you get into some of the finer points. So it's still a pretty broad score. So this is, you know, things like, as you see in the bottom right, mid-arm circumference, calf circumference. This is measuring things like muscle. You know, that's very important. Your lean body mass is like metabolic currency, and it gives you some resilience in addition to better function. So this is the MNA. The problem with this is, you know, this kind of like jokingly, we do a lot of nutritional assessments. It's not under the bright lights and certainly not handcuffed to a chair, but you know, a lot of people don't remember exactly what they ate. Certainly not going back to April 17th, 1991 at 6:37 p.m. All right, so this is one of the challenges with this. This is why a lot of times we use biomarkers. So what this really is just, we won't get too much into details here in this time. It's just things measured really, usually from the blood, sometimes the hair. But this is relevant to you because you're more likely, you know, when you see your doctor to ask for a blood test of something. You know, again, this is more for kind of research purposes, but if you want to measure the protein someone ate, they actually look at the urine. You know, so we look at urinary nitrogen excretion. It's collected over 24 hours. It's kind of a pain to do because every time you urinate, you have to have this cup ready and then you put it in the freezer. Sometimes they use other things from the blood, but these are all, they're not terribly specific. Things like albumin you may have heard about and so on. Carbohydrate, really no good measure for overall carbohydrate intake, although blood and urine, or for blood, I mean, if anyone's diabetic or pre-diabetic, and you've probably had your HbA1c, it's one way to measure that. Or you can look in the urine, they look at the sugar that comes out in the urine. And so on. Fiber, the stool, but that's not something many people are going to do. So, and then finally fat, this is another one where they can look at either fat tissue. No one's going to sign up to do that, all right? That's where they actually do a biopsy, or they look in the blood sometimes. That you can do. So if anyone's interested in their omega-3 levels, you can get a finger stick test, and they'll look at your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. That you can ask your doctors for, and I think a good thing to have an eye on. So we're going to get into vitamin B12 and its special importance in aging as we go along. But this, I really want to emphasize this second part here, that what you see in the serum or plasma, and that's a lot of times it's components of blood where this is measured, that grossly underestimates true B12 deficiency because most of the serum B12 is not available to your cells. So more accurate B12 biomarkers, as you see there, are homocysteine and this thing called methylmalonic acid. These are metabolites of B12. So, this is an area where we need more research. But, if you were ever to go and ways you can tell it might be low in B12 energy and so on. Now, that may be, a lot of times it's sleep or other things, but B12 deficiency is a lot more common in older people. And other things too, like vegan diets and some other types of things than we think, because we're using an assessment device that sort of underestimates. Magnesium, also really, really important. This is one that very actionable for you that, again, serum does not reflect the total body magnesium levels, less than 1% actually. So by the time something gets low, your magnesium is low in serum, you're likely going to have problems. It means you're pretty darn low in it. You can test red blood cell magnesium. That's something that you can ask your doctor for, and this will give you a better idea. Then there's also magnesium tolerance test. This is harder to do. That's more of a research type of thing where they give you a very high dose of magnesium and then they measure the excretion in the urine. But think about the red blood cell magnesium test. We'll get more into magnesium as we go along. So the dietary recommendations you see here, it's changed shapes. It was a pyramid at one point in time, and now it's a plate. Lots of other diets that are out there too, all of which have some evidence behind them. All of which have some caveats in terms of, all right, if you're going to do this, and I can answer questions about these if you have any. But one thing that we teach our medical students about diet, and really teach them that there's many ways to eat healthy. You find one that resonates with you. Then there's a food pyramid specifically for older adults. And notice at the top here, kind of small, vitamin B12, vitamin D, and calcium. These are ones you want to be especially mindful of. Okay, so what are some of the things that older adults need generally? Increased protein intake. I mentioned that before. Increased fluid intake. All right. And being mindful. Coffee is great. Coffee is actually one of the greatest sources of antioxidants in the American diet, which is sort of a condemnation of the American diet, but also the sign that, coffee can be good. Caffeine has health benefits. Just don't have it too close to bed. And it's a diuretic and, can be dehydrating. So you got to drink a lot of water. And then key micronutrients. So B12, calcium, and vitamin D are some of the ones that are in this food pyramid, but there's many others that are important. Magnesium, without a doubt, and there are lots of other ones too. Right? So why this need for more protein? Well, there's a decrease in total body protein with age, and it's protein that makes up not just our muscle, but just about everything. We're made up of proteins. So we see, as you see in the picture here, would be a decreased skeletal muscle mass. This is not necessarily something that has to happen. In time, many decades of time, yes, but by staying active, getting enough protein, potentially taking creatine monohydrate, I can answer questions about that. These are ways that you can stave off muscle loss. But subclinically, there are other things like organ tissue, immune system, blood components, start to have issues as well. So The skeletal muscle decrease, by age 70, a lot of times it's 27% of total body weight, as opposed to 45% younger. And this is where sarcopenia you may have heard about. All right, this is not necessarily inevitability, though. So I really want to emphasize that. We need to get as I mentioned earlier, protein gets broken down to amino acids, right? And it's the amino acids that build up skeletal muscle. And it's been consistently, for many years now, the older adults need more protein than the RDA for others. So research suggests at least 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So if we look at a 150-pound person, that means it would be 68 grams of protein per day. Some would argue even more for certain conditions. And what happens if you don't get enough? Well, losing muscle mass for one, but weakness and disability, the immune system gets worse, right? Wound healing is slowed, skin problems. So need more than 1 gram per kilogram. Some even say sometimes close to 1 gram per pound for these conditions. And no evidence of renal harm for this. So if someone has kidney issues, then they may want to, be mindful of how much protein they're eating. But in the absence of kidney issues, there's really no evidence of harm to healthy kidneys. Now, not all protein is the same, all right? And the source makes a difference. And generally speaking, animal proteins are more bioavailable than vegetable proteins. So whey protein isolate is probably the best. It's what's used in a lot of studies. When we do research and we want to look at it, basically the effects of protein, these are the best. Eggs are also very good. That's sort of the standard that's at 100. You see a lot of these other ones like soy and wheat and beef. These are quite low, right? So not to say that they're to be avoided, but just knowing that you need to be aware of what's bioavailable and what's not. All right. Soy, and we can see the comparison. All right. So other reasons why we need more digestion. We talked about lactose intolerance a little bit. We can talk about yogurt too. So that's a good thing to consume. Make sure it doesn't have too much sugar. But if you have lactose issues, for one, no one needs dairy, but it is a good source of protein and calcium. And whey can be a good source. It doesn't contain much lactose. And whey protein isolate usually has none. But we also need to think about other factors too. Affordability, certainly, that's an issue for everybody. And ease of preparation. So with mobility challenges, for some people, it's not that easy. I like eggs because, getting a dozen eggs, particularly if you can get them, from like a source that is like pasture raised, you'll know the difference because the yolk's going to be like a bright orange as opposed to like a pale yellow. That's a great thing to have. And you can make them in bulk. It's sort of easy that way, right? Make my hard-boiled eggs and have them for a week. You can get pre-prepared fish, chicken, lean beef, low-sugar yogurts. Again, preferably grass-fed. That will cost more. But the nice thing is the market has demanded this, and you see it even at Walmart and places like that. Get whey protein preparations and then carefully combine vegetable sources. So there are some good plant protein sources, things like pea and brown rice. These are better than soy. So if you are on a vegan or plant-based diet, there are some good sources out there. Just you got to look at that, making sure they have the essential amino acids in good amounts. Okay, so we're switching gears briefly from what you eat to what you drink. Older adults, it's pretty clear. You need to really increase the fluid intake. Dehydration's higher. In certain places, like in the hospital and long-term care, up to 80% of residents are dehydrated. In the community, it's more like 10%, but it varies depending on where we're talking about. And how do we measure this? Well, one of the easiest ways is urine color. Very darkly colored urine. It should be, pale yellow. The osmolality in it, when you get a blood test, you can look at the blood urea nitrogen to creatinine ratio. You can look at osmolality in the serum as well as the urine, and then other things too. Dry mouth, decreased sweat, decreased salivation, decreased urination. You get the furrowed tongue. All right, so these are all ways to do it, but an easy way you can do it every time you go to the bathroom is just look at the color. It should not be very dark yellow. Reasons why: decreased thirst response. Here's like sort of a perfect storm of reasons why. I think the knowledge is there sometimes, but just the follow up on it might not. There's an increased risk of conditions that compromise fluid intake. So disability, it's harder to get up and drink. Delirium and dementia, it's not something that's front and center. Decreased muscle mass and increased fat mass. Muscle holds a lot of water. Okay, decline in kidney function. More water gets lost and less concentrated urine. All right, and then medications too. So this is another thing. So things like diuretics, certainly that's what they do. Laxatives, blood pressure medications, and the list goes on. So I would talk with your doctors and read up on some of the side effects of some of these things. So you can see how for many people, they might have multiple of these risk factors and are very likely then to be at risk of dehydration. Okay, here's another appraisal checklist. And again, you get your easy, every time you go to the bathroom test of looking at urine color, but that's not perfect. And by the way, if you take a B12 supplement, which may be a good thing to do, sometimes your urine's gonna be very brightly colored. It's gonna look almost radioactive. That's okay. It's just some of the extra B12 coming out. So these are some of the characteristics. So advanced age, 85 years or more, women, those with very low BMI or those that are high BMI. And then a lot of these health conditions, you see some of the medications, and you see some of the urine, again, urine dark yellow, you get that bond to creatinine ratio from your blood test, right? So these are some things to think. And if you have any of these, just beware, that you may need to drink more water. We know dehydration is associated with adverse outcomes. Constipation is obvious, but many others too, all right? And getting all the way down even to mortality in the hospital. So this is why you see that fluid back in an older adult food pyramid, you have all those glasses of water in there. And this is why we need to be aware of this. Hydration in hospitals and long-term care is closely monitored, but still, be vigilant of that. If you have a loved one in the hospital or if you yourself should happen to go, be aware of this because there are mistakes that get made sometimes. All right, now we're going to get into some of these micronutrients and in the last 10 minutes, and I'll leave, we'll take the floor for questions. B12, we talked a little bit before, protective against many diseases and deficiencies common, especially among older adults and especially among vegans. And most vegans lower in B12. Fortunately, they're gaining knowledge that B12 supplementation really is important. But look, 60% of older adults in a long-term care setting of some sort. And this is depleted by a lot of key medications. I'm going to give you a link to show some others too, but these are like your acid blockers. So if you have acid reflux, things like Prilosec, Tagamet, and so on, reduce B12. It's because the stomach acid is what helps break down. See this big vitamin up here. There's a lot there. It takes a lot to break it down. Then anti-diabetic medications, including metformin, which may be useful for aging in a lot of ways, certainly for those with diabetes and metabolic syndrome, but it can deplete B12. The dietary sources are animal protein. See this listed here. So, consider supplements. Certainly, if you have low serum B12, you should most definitely supplement. But others too. So there's that MMA measure and so on. And if you're taking these B12 depleting medications, B12 is water soluble. You'll pee it out if you get more than your body needs. We get more cautious with the fat soluble vitamins, which this is not one. And we're on a vegetarian or vegan diet for sure. So these are things to think about B12. Calcium, all right. You probably all aware of this. It's not just bones. That's the big, for osteoporosis or osteopenia. Other functions too, muscle contraction, nerve conduction, regulates enzymes activity, cell membrane. So it's very, very important across the board. And the way this works sometimes is when there's low calcium in the blood, it gets taken from the bone where it's stored. So that's why you'll see things like osteoporosis. So if someone doesn't have enough calcium intake or other conditions are increasing the need for it, they'll get low blood calcium, it'll extract it from the bones and then lead to osteoporosis. You can see how that works. So we know that calcium intake prevents and helps treat osteoporosis, especially with vitamin D. So sources, we went through this a little bit. You see some of them here. Always supplement with vitamin D because it's going to help it get into the bones. If you really want to get into this, if you're, again, a nutrition enthusiast, you can take vitamin K2. That also helps. In any case, these are the people who are most likely to need to supplement with calcium, are those that are, postmenopausal women or anyone who has low bone mineral density. Those that are lactose intolerant or just choose to avoid dairy for other reasons. And then, again, we get these medications here, acid blockers, certain antibiotics, digoxin, and so on. So these are all laxatives, ones that we need to be aware of. Vitamin D, this is like one that we hear a ton about, controls the expression of many, many different genes. It's not just the musculoskeletal system, it's the endocrine system, nervous system, immune system, that's on everyone's minds now. Okay? And it's unique among the vitamins in that it's predominantly from sun exposure, right? And even with this, there's a couple areas where things can go. So you get the UVB light, which is blocked by sunscreen, just to know. It gets converted to vitamin D3 in the skin. That goes to the liver, okay? And that gets metabolized to 25-hydroxy D. That's at 25-OHD. That's what you get in your blood tests. Then it goes to the kidneys. So if you have liver or kidney problems or genetic variants, there's a lot of places in that process where things can go wrong. And to put it into perspective, we get about 20,000 international units, or IU. If you've ever had a vitamin D supplement, you'll see IU in the label, from about half an hour of sun exposure in the spring and summer of north of Atlanta. We've hardly had any sun recently. It's going to change. But being aware of that. You don't get that much from foods, and that's where supplements are especially important. It can be, so vitamin D is fat soluble. The vitamins that are A, D, E, and K, these are the ones that can build up in your fat and cause toxicity. But for vitamin D, you'd have to take an ungodly amount. You see it here, 176 million IU. That's 440,000 400 IU capsules. Good luck even being able to take that many things. So it's very rare, all right? The RDAs are pretty low for this, and there's a call to increase them because we don't see much rickets, in the U.S., but we do see a fair amount of osteomalacia in older adults, especially those in long-term care. So just make sure to get your vitamin D levels tested, right? These are some of the others. I'm not sure where those that live in Baltimore certainly the fall and winter. Those are darker skin tone. It's less efficient synthesis in the skin. If you, like a heliophobe who avoids the sun at all costs or wears sunscreen, it's worth taking a supplement as well. But most importantly, is getting it tested. Everyone on this call should get it tested if you haven't before, right? Because there's a lot of factors that can go into it. And then the one we'll close with, I think, to leave time for questions, is magnesium. It's very important. Also involved in many physiological processes. So 60% of magnesium is in bone. So we know bone's important with aging. It's also important in protein synthesis and nerve and muscle function. So a lot of times magnesium is used in sleep formulations to help people relax. And we know from many studies, magnesium intake protects against chronic disease. I mentioned before, when there's low blood magnesium, it extracts it from the cells. So we really want to measure red blood cell magnesium and not just the blood. By the time it's low in the blood, you have problems. So this is really common. And magnesium RDA is not met at any age, but especially among older adults. So these are the RDAs, and you can get this in food. I'll show you some of these, or supplements or supplements. So a lot of the food sources are things like leafy greens, pumpkin seeds are a good source, and others. Here with the supplements, this is where it gets a little confusing, but you'll have this resource, is that not all supplements are created equally, for sure. And that's an area of expertise of mine on how to teach people to have a discriminating eye. But magnesium oxide, if you look at the label, that's not very well absorbed, and these other kinds that I've listed here are. And when might people want to do this? If you're not eating leafy green vegetables, you're probably not getting enough magnesium. If you have GI disorders, muscle problems, or heart arrhythmia, you probably don't have enough magnesium. And then there's a fair amount of common medications like Lasix and Digoxin and so on that deplete magnesium. So we really need to be aware of this. And just on good health, it's good. These are good things to be eating anyway, but to be aware of. And I think what I'll do is we'll have this available to you. These are not things that we see very much in the developed world. Things like protein energy malnutrition, just not getting enough protein total calorie intake. Sadly, things like kwashiorkor we see in the developing world quite a bit, where you see this distended abdomen here, very high mortality. Marasmus, we don't see that much in the US either, but in some long-term settings, this is more like the loss of all muscle mass and so on. So, it's just not things we see a whole lot of, but maybe a little bit more in long-term care settings. So, more we're talking about these would be more of relevance to you would be, some of these micronutrient inadequacy, making sure you're getting enough protein, making sure you're drinking enough water, and so on. And this is the link, and I'll close here, and then we can take questions that you'll have that looks at some common medications and the nutrients that they deplete. So this is my email too, so we can stop here and then take questions if you like.
Thank you, Dr. Christopher Diamo. Yes, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Okay, I see a question. Can we overdose on vitamin supplements, or should we only pay attention to fat soluble at 80 Ks? How can we judge from label? Yeah, okay. So it's more important for things like vitamin E or retinol as vitamin A. But you can overdose it even on non-fat solubles. You can get too much where you could feel uncomfortable. Nutrients are sort of like I like to say like a symphony, where if your cello is too loud, it's going to ruin the piece of music. And I think it's similar really for nutrients as well. Now that's not that you don't want to take them. I think a good multivitamin is something pretty much everyone is taking. And then if you let's say you're on any of those medications, or you're feeling low energy, it may make sense to take B12. You're not going to get magnesium. So all those reasons we talked about. Now, consulting PCP about supplement intake, I think it's a good thing to initiate that conversation. What I wish is that they, as a whole, were more knowledgeable. I've been working on that. I've been teaching medical students for the last 10 years, and we're working on that. But sometimes they don't know. And I want to give everyone a good resource here. It's very simple. Examine.com has wonderful resource on all kinds of supplements. I use it myself to refer to things. It's citations to the medical literature and so on. It gives dosages. It gives all kinds of different things, potential adverse effects, interactions, and so on. So that's a good thing to check out. examine.com, examine.com. And then finally, the calcium supplements, yes, could move into fatty plaques in the arteries. That's why you want to take vitamin D along with it, because vitamin D helps the absorption into the bones. But calcium in and of itself, by itself. Okay, the next question, one of my favorites, intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding for older adults. So I do this personally. It's been one of the best things I've done for my health. I think it depends on, obviously older adults are not all one category. If you have someone who is robust with good muscle mass and doing regular physical activity, then they are just looking to maybe get a little mental function. There's autophagy, which is this process where damaged cells start to consume themselves, which may help aging. For that type of person, good. For someone in long-term care or someone who's frail, absolutely not a good idea. So I think it just depends on the situation, and what the goals are and what the rest of the landscape is with that person. So, and I think a lot of that's going to come down to the lean body mass. But if
Demo, I see a few hands that are raised in the video
okay.
cam. Bernie, I'm going to go ahead and mute you 1 second.
Okay.
Great.
Go ahead.
Sir, could you say something about phosphorus and intake of it and availability of phosphorus?
Yeah, phosphorus is an interesting one. It's a mineral that it's not, to be honest, it's not as commonly addressed with things. If someone's, it's important for bone health, right? So there's a lot of things that go into bone health. It's not just calcium and vitamin D. I mentioned K2, I mentioned magnesium. Phosphorus is also very important for that. It can be in some of your trace mineral and mineral supplements. So these are little, a lot of times they're little droppers. So it's a liquid that you would put into water that can be good. Phosphorus does not get the attention it deserves. I would give you one more thing to look into and to get into the details. If there's any nutrient like phosphorus that you're interested in, go to the Linus Pauling Institute. Okay, so that's another one that has really practical, evidence-informed information across the board. Maybe I'll look at some of these questions here too that are in the chat, and then we can get some more hands. So have you known vitamin D deficiency to impact mental health? We've seen patients with depression get better vitamin D supplements. Yes, vitamin D can indeed impact mental health. In fact, it's one of the thought to be mediating factors in seasonal affective disorder. Not the only part. So the sun, just the light itself, has been shown to have positive impacts on hormones and mood and so on. But vitamin D is going to play a role in that. So just a quick note on that too. For those that can do it, when you get up in the morning, get a little sunlight. If you can get out, and especially if you can get outside and do it. Many of us go and look at our phones first thing. That's not a good thing to do. You want to get that natural spectrum of light, and that may also help with mood. That's why you've seen those light boxes that people use for seasonal affective disorder. That plays a role in it. Okay. Let's see. Do we want to do a raise? I'll go back and forth between the raised hands and the typed questions. So is there a raised hand, Ori?
Yes, we have one. Rosalie, I'm going to unmute you.
Yes, hi. Are there any specific recommendations for somebody like me who's going to be 90 and still doing high intensity interval training and strength training? I knew what to do when I was in my 60s, but I keep doing it and I'm not sure that's the right thing.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you. So that's fantastic. And I think you're living proof that as long as it's safe, and you're doing this with good form and with, some supervision, that it's a great thing to do. And there's no rule that you can't be doing high intensity interval training when you're 90. I mentioned my grandfather, he was lifting weights when he was 90. With that, I would be aware for you especially, to make sure you're getting enough protein. Okay. You're breaking down your muscle doing this, and you want to be able to build it back up. And that's where those amino acids come in. And of course, sufficient intake in general. You may also look into creatine monohydrate supplementation, which has classically been thought of for bodybuilders and athletes and the like. But it's actually important for many people, for cognition. I take it myself for cognition. There's good data for that. Again, if you go to that examine.com, you can see about it. But I would say for you, again, congratulations. You're an inspiration for many, I'm sure. But to make sure you get that protein and potentially look into creatine monohydrate to go along with it. With that, make sure you drink a lot of water too. So hydration is especially important because creatine will draw water into your muscle, okay? And that's something to think about. All right, so the next one was, do cooked greens have the same amount of nutrients? Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. So I think cooking your greens is a good thing to do. It's for those that don't like greens, it's a sort of way to disguise the taste of them, because you can put them in to, like almost sort of disguise them in a way if you put them in a stew or something like that. You will lose some of the vitamins. You don't lose the minerals. Minerals are really robust. Okay, remember there's carbon containing. You may lose some of the vitamin C and some of the B vitamins, but that's only if you really boil the heck out of it. If you cook it gently, you're probably not going to lose many of the nutrients. All right, we're going to do a hand raise here.
Yes. Diane, please go ahead.
Okay, my late grandfather used to get bruises on his hands and arms, these weird looking bruises, and he was told it was due to a vitamin deficiency. Can you enlighten me about that?
Yeah, well, it could be. I think with vitamin K would be one that could play a role in that. So K is, the reason it got K is it's German for coagulation with the K. So there's two forms. There's vitamin K1, which is in a lot of your leafy greens and so on. So if anyone's had surgery before, you may have noticed that they say be careful of your leafy green intake around the surgery because you can thin your blood too much. Then there's vitamin K2. And so that's in fewer foods. It's in fermented foods, things like Gouda cheese, natto, which not many people like. That's fermented soybeans. But that might have been what was going on. But again, this will actually dovetail with the next question about a well-rounded vitamin supplement. Yes, I would recommend. They're going to cover some of the bases, because those will help give you some of the potentially the vitamin K. But other things like vitamin, the B vitamins, vitamin C, and so on that are important. So that could have been what it is. It's hard to know exactly, but that would be a likely candidate.
Okay.
Sure. So yes, you can. What I would do is I'll send Ori the two links. Oh, the links on the slides. Yeah, I'll make the slides available to everybody, and I'll also send the two I talked about, the Examine.com and Linus Pauling Institute. Okay. Then we had
Bernie has a hand raised. I'm going to unmute you. 1 second.
Sure.
Go ahead, Bernie.
How about turmeric in the diet?
Oh yeah, turmeric's wonderful. You saw it on the slide when I mentioned curcumin. This is a great, anti-inflammatory spice. I think it's a great thing to cook with. If you're going to cook with it, cook with some fat. All right, and some black pepper. Black pepper increases the absorption of the curcumin and the turmeric. So turmeric and curcumin are often interchanged and confused, but they're not the same thing. So the curcumin is in turmeric. But as I mentioned before, if someone has pain, or even it's used as an adjuvant cancer, I'm not going to say it's a cancer treatment, but sometimes it's used alongside it, or depression or inflammation. Some of the reasons it's curcumin taken, that would be better in the supplement form. If you're looking for general health promotion and preservation, turmeric is a good thing to cook with, using the fat and the black pepper along with it. So your clothes, it won't come off, but it's a great spice to cook with. A lot of the other spices too, ginger, cinnamon. Using these spices, they provide a lot of the anti-inflammatory benefits we talked about.
Thank you.
So I saw greens juice too. You're very welcome. Yes, greens juice can give you some of what you get from the greens, but you don't get the fiber. All right, so I would be aware of that. I would also be aware of doing too much of this. So sometimes, greens are great, but they contain oxalates, and there have been some instances. Now this is a lot. If you were to do a lot of green juice, you get a concentration amount of oxalates. These can lead to inflammation and potentially kidney stones. So I think it's okay to do, on occasion. It's better to eat them because that way you get the fiber as well. But I think having some greens juice here and there is a good way to help get it. I wonder if Tamika doesn't like greens because I talked about cooking it and juicing it. And I think either one is okay. I just would be careful not to. Oh, you love it. Good. To not overdo it with the juice. Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, just wait a few more minutes. Just any other questions? Okay, well,
There's one
here.
Go on to Q10. Did you want me to comment on that?
Morton, would you like me to unmute you to ask the question? Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Is coenzyme Q10 supplements something you recommend?
So I would recommend coenzyme Q10 supplement to anyone who takes a statin. Statins have been shown to deplete CoQ10. And why is that important? CoQ10 is essential for the function of your mitochondria. I mentioned that those are the sort of powerhouses of your cells that give you energy to do everything you do. And it's also important for muscle and heart function. So one of the reasons why people taking a statin sometimes have been shown to have muscle issues is that their coenzyme Q10 levels have been depleted. Okay, so let's say you're not on a statin. I still think it's worth it. I take it myself, just because if you're interested in preservation of mitochondrial function, muscle function, and so on, that it's worthwhile. And it tends to be fairly expensive, so that is one thing that need to be mindful of.
What dosage? What size?
Sure. So there's a couple. That's the question. So there's a couple different forms. There's, and you need to take notes for this: ubiquinone and ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is the ending in the OL is the preferred form. With that, most people, the studies have shown, taking between 100 to 200 milligrams a day. If you're on a statin, you may take 300 milligrams. The ubiquinone, you might need to take more. All right. Again, I would check out examine.com for some of the evidence on this, but I would recommend it to probably most people on this call.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Recommendation for a multivitamin. One last link I'll give you to is multivitaminguide.org. So pretty easy to remember, multivitaminguide, one word, .org, and they rank a bunch of the different multivitamins that are out there. And I'll give you another link too in the email I send to Ori is labdoor.com, and they also rank a bunch of multivitamins and other supplements based on quality, because the quality varies tremendously.
Dr. Demo, I see one hand raised. Rosalie, do you have a question? I'm going to unmute you again.
I have a comment. I want to thank you very, very much. I was a trainer until I was 80. I know a lot of stuff. Usually when I go to these things, I don't learn anything, but I learned a whole lot today, and I want to thank you for it.
Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in.
Excellent. So on that note, thank you so much, Dr. Didamo. We really appreciate your time in presenting such an insightful presentation. We're going to finish a little bit early today, but if you have any additional questions, please send. Oh, I see one more hand raised. Bernie has a question. Hold on one second. Go ahead, Bernie.
We get all these nice fresh vegetables when we can, but sometimes you get frozen vegetables and you put them in water and you cook the water. You cook them in the water and then you dump the water. And since they're all water-soluble vegetables, where do you think the vitamins are going?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So one thing on frozen vegetables and fruit and berries and so on, they're actually great for the most part. You know, they're actually picked a lot of times riper than the ones that are shipped across the country or the world, frankly. Now, you mentioned local. Local would be ideal, you know, because there it's being picked ripe, obviously, and you're getting it at the market. Now, I recommend organic where you can afford it. Now, but the question is, let's say that it's the middle of winter and you don't have access to the fruits and vegetables. Getting them frozen is those nutrients. And when you cook them, let's say you're cooking broccoli, you know, just don't boil it so hard that it starts to destroy some of that. And you can even maintain some of the water that's in it, you know, and then some of that will get absorbed into what you're cooking. So the key there is just not to cook it into oblivion, you know, and you'll keep a fair amount of those nutrients. And if you can put it again in some kind of stew or soup, you can use that water in it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then, so the question to fresh, frozen, and canned vegetables and the pros and cons. I think fresh are great, ideally local. You're also helping the planet with that too. because they're going to be picked and served to you, right? They may have more nutrients potentially. Frozen, I talked about that. Canned is another one. I mean, canned, look for those that are BPA-free lining. You've probably heard about that. The canned is fine too. The issue with canned is they tend, I think, for many people not to taste as well. So it may be tough to, if you don't mind the taste, then it's probably okay. But really, those a lot of times have been like boiled into oblivion. So if I had to rank the three, I'd probably say in that order: fresh, frozen, and canned, or local, fresh, frozen, maybe non-local, fresh, canned. But I think the bottom line is we don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think getting them in any form like that tends to be a pretty good thing.
Thank you again for that. All right, everyone. Well, we look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be hearing from Dr. Jack Grelnick on healthy aging and mobility, the same time, 10 o'clock a.m. next Tuesday. Look forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much again, Dr. Diamo. Really appreciate your
You're
time.
very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions.
Bye.
Take care.